Hello and welcome to Sustain, the podcast where we talk about sustaining open source for the long haul. Who are we? Where did we come from? Where are we going? What CMS is running this thing? Very excited to talk to our guest today. Before I introduce them, I want to make sure you know who the voices are on this podcast. I am, of course, Richard Littauer, your illustrious and illuminable, I don't think that's a word, host. Very excited to be here. And I'm also joined today by longtime co-host Abigail Cabunoc. Abigail, how you doing?
I'm good. Not as illustrious as you, but good. Yeah.
I don't know why I said those words. I have regrets, but I'll live with them. That's okay. You know who doesn't have regrets? People who've been in the Drupal ecosystem for 20 years. Very excited to have Robert Douglas on today. Robert is the entrepreneur in residence at Open Strategy Partners. He's joining us today from Bonn, Germany. Robert, how are you doing?
Oh, I'm really happy to be here and very grateful to you, Richard and Abigail, for hosting me. Thank you.
I'm grateful that you reached out and said, hey, I have a story to tell. That is awesome. Before we get into that, I have to ask, you know Leslie Hawthorne lives in Germany, like in Bonn, right? You must know Leslie.
Oh, I know Leslie. We actually see each other in Bonn from time to time, and I've invited her to my Christmas house concert where there will be piano playing and Christmas carols.
That sounds lovely. I wish I was in Bonn.
Come on over.
Can we do that in Toronto or something? I don't know. I feel like we need to do that. Cool. That's amazing.
I don't know if Toronto's any closer to you, Richard, but yeah, we could do it everywhere.
It's fine. I really wish Bonn was in France so I could say Bonn, but the joke just doesn't work very well. All right, Robert, tell me about Open Strategy Partners and what you're doing as entrepreneur in residence.
Sure. Open Strategy Partners is a strategic content marketing agency, and we focus on B2B tech companies, especially open source companies or projects. And we have a number of agencies. We have a number of projects like DDEV and Drupal and TYPO3 who work directly with us. And we also work with product companies whose products rely heavily on open source software. Our USP in this subject is not only the strategic marketing workshops that we bring, but also our deep knowledge of open source and the ecosystems around that.
What does USP stand for?
Oh, unique selling proposal.
Excellent. So Drupal is not a small project. Tell me a bit about the history between Open Strategy Partners and Drupal, or how you ended up where you are.
Well, I mean, I personally go all the way back to 2004 with Drupal, which was pretty much the beginning for the project on the world stage. I was at the first meetup that Dries Buytaert hosted in Antwerp, where there were 35 people. And I wrote the first book on the topic of Drupal. It was also co-written with Mike Little, who was the co-founder of WordPress. And it talked about building online communities with Drupal, WordPress, and PHP/BB, if you remember that one. So I've been involved with Drupal quite a long time. And one of the co-founders of Open Strategy Partners, Jeffrey Maguire, Jam, and I have worked within the context of the Drupal project for almost that entire time. We both worked at Acquia together. And after Acquia, he founded with Tracy Evans, his co-partner, Open Strategy Partners. And they just recently recruited me to be entrepreneur in residence, and I'm the hacker maker type now in the leadership team, building products within the company for our customers and for ourselves to bring large leverages to the value that they already create for their customers.
So entrepreneur in residence is less of a, I'm going to found new irrelevant things, and more, I'm the person who takes big risks and makes new products happen as I go along. Does that sound about right?
I wave my hands a lot.
I also just waved mine on the video. Sorry, listeners, you can't see that. We've had Dries on this podcast before. I'll drop those links in the show notes for those of you who are curious. That was episode 109. We haven't ever had any of the co-founders of WordPress. I didn't even know that WordPress had a co-founder because Matt sucks up all the air in the room, which is just how it goes. We don't have to talk too much about that. That's fine. It's just a different platform. I do remember PHP/BB. Those were fun days. Tell me about this first book, because you've written several books, right?
I've been involved with writing several books, but the one that I consider I wrote, which was actually still co-authored, but I wrote the entire Drupal section, was published in 2005 by A Press, and it was called Building Online Communities with Drupal, WordPress, and PHP/BB. And it was really a differentiator, especially for those three systems, because there weren't a lot of books at that point about the burgeoning environment for content management systems. There were thousands of content management systems. It was not obvious that WordPress and Drupal would, quote unquote, win the race and become big players on the world stage. So having a book about those topics really did set those projects apart. And it also elevated my profile in the community and accelerated my career. And I'm grateful for that.
Now, 2005, I think I was a junior in high school. So let's just put that in some context. But one of the things I'm curious about is, if you remember, did you mention anything in that book about sustainability of open source platforms and how to do this sustainably for the long haul?
Oh, no, not at all. At that point, we were all amazed by the worldwide phenomenon of people coming together to collaborate on a common vision and share the output of their work. And in fact, most people at that point who were doing it hadn't transitioned into the phase that came next, where they could earn money doing it. Almost everybody was doing it completely as a side project, completely altruistically. There was no ecosystem for doing Drupal projects. That was unheard of at the time. And in fact, one of the things that I contributed to the project early on was to encourage many individuals to start charging for their work and to find paid work to sustain them individually in their quest for contributing to open source. And then later, I also encouraged many startups or individuals to productize what they were doing so they could have something more than an hourly wage, sustaining their effort to work on open source. But that all came later. In 2005, we thought we were changing the entire world. We thought we were revolutionizing society. We didn't have any thought that we'd all go broke if we just pursued our passion of contributing Drupal patches.
I would say you were changing society and that you were collaborating on a global network of code. That's still true. It's just couched in a different context.
And that's definitely the time when a lot of this collaborating online was taking off and getting really exciting. So it's exciting to hear Drupal's part in this. I did look up the book, and there's a lot of reviews. People love it. This guy's like, I only read the Drupal section of the book. Highly recommend to anyone learning Drupal.
A warning to anybody who might go out and try to buy that book. It refers to Drupal versions that you would have a hard time even finding anymore. It's probably not worth it anymore.
Yeah, it talks about upcoming Drupal 4.7, which probably has been out for a while.
I remember those days. They were really exciting. So one of the things I'm really curious about is that you've been working with open strategy partners and with the Drupal Association to boost awareness amongst CMS users. Tell me about that.
The Drupal Certified Partner Program is actually at the heart of the Drupal project's effort to make Drupal sustainable. So that's why I thought it was a perfect topic to bring to this podcast, because it's all about sustainable open source. And it also stems from the concept that Dries Buytaert put forward of the maker-taker dilemma, where there are people who make open source products, and then there are people who take those and generate value for themselves, but without giving back to the project itself. And we know, and probably most of the listeners know, that open source is like a free puppy. You don't get to enjoy the puppy properly if you don't feed it. So the maker-taker problem, Dries frames as an existential problem for open source that has to be solved if open source is going to be sustainable and long-term. And his recommendations include the takers, the people who want to use open source in any way, recognizing that they have to cultivate and nurture the projects that they depend on if they want to have them in their hand for a long time. And they can nurture and cultivate those projects with both their time and their treasure. And it's this time and treasure duality that I think is really important and really coming to a head right now worldwide in the open source ecosystem, because lots of people are donating their time, but not enough people are donating their treasure to those people who have more time than treasure.
Tell me how the Drupal Certified Partner Program actually enables that. How does it make that happen better?
To understand how the Drupal Certified Partner Program makes the sustainability of Drupal better by this time and treasure duality, you have to understand the Drupal contribution system and the contribution credits that you can earn by contributing to Drupal. If you review patches or commit patches or maintain a module, and there are a list of things that you're able to do to earn credits, then you as an individual earn these credits and they're ascribed to you. But then there's another layer where you can list your employer on Drupal.org. And then those credits also bubble up to and aggregate at the employer level, because there's a recognition that a lot of employers make room for their employees to actually contribute to Drupal because they depend on Drupal and they want to nurture it and cultivate it. So, for example, I've interviewed dozens now of Drupal certified partners, and many of them do like an 80-20 split, where 80% of the work hours in a week are billable for their engineers and 20% are expected to be contributed back to the project. Now, each employer takes a slightly different take on that. Some don't have an 80-20 split for everybody, but they then go and full out hire a core maintainer and just pay them to maintain Drupal core or maintain important modules. So these credits then bubble up into the Drupal calls partners, and there are 2,000 to 3,000 of these commercial partners listed on Drupal.org, all ranked by their contribution credits. And this is really an amazing competition. This is the best gamification system for open source that anybody has ever thought of, ever, in my opinion, because these 3,000 commercial entities who are all earning money using Drupal, it's encouraging them to be makers as well and to contribute their time to the program. But out of those 3,000 partners, there are only 100 Drupal certified partners. And the reason is there are two thresholds that you have to cross to change from being a Drupal partner to being a Drupal certified partner. And those thresholds are contribution credits, your time, and money, your treasure. So to become a Drupal certified partner, you have to have reached a certain level to be in a certain tier of the Drupal Certified Partner Program. And if you have reached that level with your contribution credits, you are allowed to pay up to $30,000 a year as a company to be a certified partner. And that brings benefits and obligations to that partner. That brings the benefit that you can have a privileged place at a DrupalCon with your booth. It has the benefit that your case studies get prominently featured on Drupal.org, so more business will go to your site when people come seeking a service provider. But it has the obligation that you do joint marketing with the Drupal Association to promote Drupal generally, globally. So it's really quite an amazing program, in my opinion. And one of the Drupal certified partners that I spoke with described it as a flywheel, where everybody puts in a little bit of energy and the wheel goes a little bit faster, but that energy collects the more that everybody's pushing on it, and it's spinning faster and faster and storing that energy and building something bigger than the sum of the parts. And I really like that way of thinking about things.
I do really like that concept of a flywheel and just how momentum builds on momentum. And I do love that maker-taker problem and just that framing. I remember when the newer blog post came out after I think you called it the WordPress kerfuffle. After that, it was such a level-headed way to address what was going on in the ecosystem. And I really valued having that kind of framing, having that kind of thinking in this space. So when I was researching before this podcast for the Drupal certified partners, I think I also saw that certain people will choose their vendors based on whether or not they're on this list. So there's real monetary value for being a certified partner too.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. In my interviews of the certified partners, I directly asked, do you have any evidence that people are choosing you based on your presence in this program? And they got direct quotes from some other customers saying yes. But that's what led us directly to the idea of writing an RFP template, which is one of the things that I want to talk about next with you, because we thought that if we could get more people to directly request a Drupal certified partner, or if it's not in Drupal, then a partner that's certified in a similar way by a similarly neutral nonprofit organization, then we would do more to sharpen the necessity for open source in governments or NGOs or large organizations. And we would also give more impetus for people and companies to try to be in the program itself. So it would create demand for the program from both sides.
Oh, that's really interesting. Before we go into the templates, I did want to ask a bit about the gamification piece. I find with open source, I tend to shy away from gamification, especially around hackathons, because it tends to promote like a certain type of personality, or it gamifies things that we don't necessarily want. And it tends to discourage like women from getting involved. Are you finding anything similar with this? Or because it's companies, you're not seeing the same dynamics? I wonder if you have thoughts on that.
I do think that putting it at the company level helps protect underrepresented groups from the fray, being in the fray and feeling like they would have to overperform to represent and therefore maybe shy away from the effort altogether. And I do know that there are a lot of women-led companies in the Drupal ecosystem who are doing quite well in this system. So my gut feeling, without any evidence or statistics other than anecdotal, would be that it puts it at the right level to not have those adverse effects. However, I do also know that there are companies that work very hard to try to gamify or game the system, to try to manipulate the system to their own benefit. But what I've also seen is that the companies that are consistently at the top of that list are companies like Previous Next in Australia, who simply look at contributing to Drupal as a net benefit business value for them. So Owen Lansbury, who runs that company, describes it as the best junior to senior training program he can find for his developers. He can hire a junior developer with potential, let them contribute to open source on Drupal.org, and all of a sudden they're brushing shoulders with some of the top devs in the industry and having their ideas challenged as an equal peer without any office politics or anything like that. And it's entirely led by those developers' own interests, letting them bloom into whatever kind of developer they're meant to be. And by the time they've done a year or two of contribution to Drupal.org, they're a senior developer. And he didn't have to do anything, and it gets him credits.
I have a different question. So it sounds very similar to Linux Foundation to me. It sounds very similar to a large charity that's sort of running a large open source project, and it's a charity for legal reasons and tax reasons, and people can become partners and people can submit. And these things aren't necessarily bad. They're not necessarily good either. I'm really curious about how, say, all the dependencies of Drupal are funded by this work. Does the work go to the charismatic project at the top, to the Drupal Association? Is that where the fees are going, the up to $30,000 you mentioned? What are you doing with these fees and these projects to ensure that people downstream of the large projects are also being accounted for and also gathering some benefits from the Drupal Certified Partner Program? How are you ensuring that it trickles down?
So the fees that the Drupal Association collects, along with any fees that they collect from DrupalCons or other forms of sponsorship or charitable donations, all go to support their core mission. And they have to be very transparent about how they spend that money. A lot of it goes to running the infrastructure and maintenance of the Drupal.org site and to running conferences. And the money from the Drupal Certified Partner Program isn't special money in the sense that it doesn't have a special purpose. It goes into the general budget, as far as I know. And to answer that question properly, you'd simply have to look at their financial statements to know how they spend the money.
That's fair. Do you know if Drupal itself has a policy of paying downstream maintainers all the way down the stack to the protocol, to like HTTP, et cetera?
So I like your question because I wanted to talk generally about initiatives like Thanks Dev and how good I feel they are for where things are going for sustainable open source. So that's one thing. But the Drupal Association doesn't pay developers to develop on Drupal core or any of the modules or themes. They do hire a couple of technologists to work on Drupal.org and some of the software that runs the Drupal project. And sometimes there are sponsored initiatives that they may or may not participate in financially that contribute to Drupal. But those are more one-off initiatives that go through a governance process, as far as I know. And I don't feel like I'm an expert to answer the question. But as a short answer to your question, the Drupal Association doesn't pay its developers as a general policy.
That's helpful. I think a lot of the times when I see large charities or large communities donating a lot of money, and then things come up like, well, with this money, you're going to get a seat at the table at the conference. I often wonder, well, how much is that conference actually taking up a large amount of the actual money that's being used? And it's great to have a community and it's great to talk to developers. I'm just always wondering whether or not things get stuck at one level of the chain and not at another level of the chain, right? And how do we ensure that money flows all the way down and all the way back up and everyone sort of benefits? And it sounds like this is a really awesome program for enabling partners to be seen. And that is really important and really necessary. And that's just amazing. I love that. I'm just thinking about 20 years from now, what's going to happen to the people who aren't getting a slice of that pie, and how do we ensure that the community as a whole sort of grows? And it seems like you've answered that a bit by saying, well, what we're doing is enabling all boats to rise. Let's help the entire community out, which is great. So thanks for answering that. So we've now covered Drupal Certified Partner a fair amount. One of the things we sort of mentioned was RFP templates. This came up in the prep for this episode and something you've been working on recently. Tell us about it.
Sure. So the mission that the Drupal Association gave to open strategy partners was not, hey, go get the Drupal Association more Drupal certified partners. It was, go get the Drupal certified partners more customers. How do we do that? We make the Drupal Certified Partner Program look like a must-have aspect of choosing a service provider. And how do we do that? Well, we hypothesized that if there were a template that existed for any procurement team who was about to do a project, a digital project, a CMS project, a digital experience project, if there was a template for that RFP that prescribed open source software and prescribed certified qualified partners who had gone through a program, for example, the Drupal Certified Partner Program, then it would create more demand for the Drupal certified partners generally. And it would also show great proof points that the program was valued outside of the Drupal ecosystem itself. So Open Strategy Partners did some research, and we wrote a version of this template, and the Drupal Association published it. And the response from the community was really impressive to me. We started getting messages from agencies who were congratulating us, and some reposted about it. And I think most people understood right away that the idea of the template was for people to be able to take and edit and adjust and maybe republish or distribute to their potential customers. But some people want to take it even a step further. And there's a small coalition, maybe a growing coalition of Drupal agencies who see this effort as being as fundamental to the health of the Drupal project as, for example, when we introduced our code of conduct, because it really means something. It stands for something. It puts a stake in the ground that says ethically and intellectually, this is the way to do things. And there's a lot of procurement that still happens with RFPs. And RFPs are hard for everybody involved, writing them, responding to them, winning those projects. If there started to be a high occurrence of people issuing RFPs that demand open source responses and prefer open source responses from people with verifiable credentials, that would be amazing for the sustainability of open source.
I like the idea. Talk to me a bit more about how it makes it easier for developers, because they still have to fill out, like they still have to answer the RFP, right? Isn't that still a lot of work?
This doesn't make it easier for the people answering the RFPs. This makes it easier for the people writing the RFPs. It's still horrible answering RFPs. You can't avoid that. RFPs are like the dementors of the industry. They suck the life out of you. I hate them. But if we can make them better, let's make them better.
I normally don't come off to laugh. I'm just sitting over here being like, yes, that is incredibly accurate. I was at a conference yesterday with research offices from universities, and like one of the main topics was like, how the heck do we get people to stop writing grants? The amount of time it takes for people to write grants, it is brutal, right? It takes like 5 years to write a 500-page document, then it takes 5 months for someone to read and reject. And it's like, why are we doing that entire system? And so when you said RFPs are great and this is just as good as code of conducts, my head was like, no, this cannot be the answer. So help make it clearer to me. This makes it easier for companies to have a template that says, hey, this is the kind of stuff we're looking for, which just cuts down on the crud from the C-suite, where some of the people in the C-suite don't understand open source. And you just say, no, it's a template. It's known. It's industry wide. We just use it. And then the engineering manager can be like, sweet. Okay, I know that one. Yes, I'm going to use this open source project and I'm going to apply that way. Is it something like that?
Let me put it this way. A lot of people as consumers consider themselves purpose or mission driven when they make a purchase. Companies are no different. They have purpose. They have mission. Some of them have even formalized that in like a B Corp or in an NGO or a nonprofit way where they state directly that they're purpose or mission driven. This helps those companies express their purpose and mission driven aspects in their procurement process.
The procurement process always has a bottom line. How does this help them show that this is going to be a better deal investment wise? Is there like a part of the template that says we use open source because it leads to a better environment for everyone who's involved and you avoid the vendor lock-in, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
Yes, we say many things like that. And I invite you to read the blog post that says those things. And we'll put the link in the podcast notes so everybody else can too. But yes, we really do try to spell out the top and bottom line benefits of choosing an open source versus proprietary solution.
I have to ask, in this RFP, do you make a clear process for applying to the RFP for people? Do you try to make it smaller? Do you try to make it easier? Do you try to make it high trust or low trust? How are you doing that?
We give a timeline with necessary steps that are industry best practice. And this is part of the RFP template that many agencies actually responded to and wanted to have input on and help us improve. So a lot of timelines are very ambitious in RFP world and want to do things really quick, but this might be disadvantageous to smaller agencies who don't have dedicated teams to do that type of answering. So we make some suggestions on how to engage with potential vendors so that you get the best answers to your RFP. And hopefully that makes things easier for everybody.
You use an interesting word there, which was industry. Now, Deloitte is incredibly different from maybe not GitHub, but like a small project. It's different from my LLC. Do you have different types of templates for different types of companies at different levels of engineering teams?
That wasn't in the scope and purview of what Open Strategy Partners did for the Drupal Association, but it's my hope that the Drupal community will step up and take stewardship of that starting point and turn it into something bigger and greater. And I've seen some interest for this already. For example, it would be great to have some parameters that you can set that would then adjust some of the timelines or values later in the template. So as a procurement team or a project leader, self-identify who you are and what your needs are, and then the template would adjust itself. And I think that would have an even greater positive effect on the ecosystem than what we've done now. But the impetus is there, the idea is there, and now we've licensed it Creative Commons 0, so people can do it and do with what they want and take it and turn it into something great. And I'm ready, and Open Strategy Partners are ready to help anybody who wants to take that further, or you can do it on your own. It's all good. It's out there.
Listeners, you can find those on the show notes at podcast.sustainoss.org. Robert, we are running up on time, so I'm super grateful the amount of conversation we've had today. I'm super grateful for these efforts. This is really cool. I also love having guests who come on the platform and who talk about like specific things they're doing as opposed to the entire history of the world. This is really interesting to see like, hey, here's an interesting initiative. Go take a look at it. RFPs for open source. I think this is really great. Where can people follow along with your work at Open Strategies Partners or with you personally?
You'd find me on LinkedIn primarily, and also Reddit, but I think LinkedIn is probably the place to look, and we'll put a link to that in the show notes. And the Open Strategy Partners blog always posts our latest achievements and interests and activities. So I would look there as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Don't leave yet. However, at the end of every single show, we have a bit called Spotlight, where we highlight other people, projects, things, etc., nouns, really, which have been important to us and we feel like need a bit more light shed on them, which you can also find in the show notes for every single past episode. Kind of fun. Abby, what's your spotlight today?
Yeah, my spotlight's actually thinking about sustainability. It's actually the Common Sort thrift shop here in Toronto. It has really good secondhand clothes and I really enjoy it. And they have this special personal shopping service where they pull clothes for you and it's great. So that is my spotlight.
Awesome. Thank you so much. My spotlight today is Wikidata, which is part of the Wikipedia ecosystem. I've been using it recently to find any genus of species that ends in a certain Greek word. And you can do that using Sparkle, which is really not where I wanted to see myself 20 years after I started learning Sparkle. But that's fine. Here we are. It's okay. It's really cool to be able to look at the entire taxonomy with just a few quick searches. Wikidata has done amazing work making data publicly available. So thank you, Wikidata peeps. Robert, what's your spotlight today?
I want to call out Chad Whitaker and Sentry because I think that the work they're doing with the open source pledge is really amazing. And it gives me hope for the sustainability of open source going forward.
Chad Whitaker has been a longtime guest on this podcast, and you can find all of his episodes on podcast.sustainoss.org, where you can also find a ton of other things. 1, you can find the show notes for this episode, so you can learn more about Robert's awesome work. 2, you can find the show notes, which are great, which have links to all sorts of things. 3, you can probably find a link to our donate, but you can also just go to opencollective.com/sustainoss. We are running out of funds, everyone. I have to go ask for money from people, and I'm sad about that. But that's okay. That's life. I'm just saying that really loudly because it'd be great if you donated and told people to donate. You should totally do that. And, if that's too much of a step for you, that's okay. What you can do is tell your friends, hey, come listen to this awesome podcast with Robert. That's totally a thing you can do. You can do it any single time you like. You can also like this podcast on Apple, Spotify, et cetera, and send us feedback at podcast@sustainoss.org, the email address. Or you can join us on, Mastodon, Blue Sky, LinkedIn, all the platforms that are not fueling Nazis. Robert, it's been awesome to have you on here today. Thank you so much for being here and good luck with everything. It sounds like a really cool project. And say hi to Leslie when you see her for Christmas carols next.
I will do. And thank you both. It was a pleasure.